How much is enough, Ethan? My father asked, looking at me across the dinner table. Why are you still chasing success like you have something left to prove? I set my fork beside my plate and looked at him. Because I wasn't done yet. For a few seconds, nobody said anything. The old clock above my mother's kitchen doorway seemed suddenly louder than it had been all evening. My sister Claire stared down at her mashed potatoes. Mom reached for her water glass, but didn't drink. Dad leaned back in his chair and studied me with the same expression he'd worn whenever I brought home a report card, accepted a new job, or announced another plan he considered too ambitious. His name was Robert Walker, and at 67, he still had a way of making a simple question feel like a performance review. I was 38 years old. I owned a growing software services company in Columbus, Ohio. We had 23 employees, clients in 6 states, and an office that no longer required me to apologize when someone visited. From the outside, I suppose I looked successful. I owned a comfortable house. My bills were paid. I wasn't driving anything flashy, but the 7-year-old Honda in my driveway belonged to me outright, and that mattered more to me than a luxury badge ever had. Dad glanced toward the window, where the last light of Sunday evening stretched across the backyard. "You're doing well," he said. "That's my point. Most people would be satisfied." There was that word. Satisfied. I had heard variations of it from him my entire life. Take the safe job. Keep the steady paycheck. Don't risk what you've already earned trying to get something more. Dad had worked 36 years for the same manufacturing company outside Columbus. He had been dependable, careful, respected, and almost painfully practical. He believed stability was something a man built one paycheck at a time. I believed something different, though I hadn't always known why. "Maybe most people would," I said. Dad gave a small shrug. "Then what are you trying to prove?" Claire looked up this time. Mom quietly said, "Robert." Just his name. That was how she warned him when she thought he had pushed too far. Dad wasn't angry. That almost made it harder. He looked genuinely confused, as though my ambition were a complicated habit he had spent years trying to understand. "I'm asking a reasonable question," he said. "You've been doing this for years. Late nights, weekends, missed holidays. You've built the company. You've made your point. When do you get to enjoy your life?" I looked at him and felt an answer rise that I had no intention of saying aloud. "When you finally tell me I did something right." Instead, I picked up my water glass. "I enjoy my life." Dad smiled faintly. Not cruelly. Not warmly either. "Do you?" The question stayed between us. Mom changed the subject by asking Claire about a renovation she was planning, and the conversation moved on because that was what our family did when something uncomfortable landed on the table. We moved around it. We passed the rolls. We talked about weather, property taxes, football, anything that allowed us to pretend nothing important had just happened. 20 minutes later, I helped Mom carry dishes into the kitchen. She bumped my shoulder gently with hers. "Don't let him get under your skin." He didn't. She gave me the look mothers give their sons when the sons are still pretending mothers can't read them. "Of course." I smiled, kissed her cheek, and went for my coat. Dad was standing near the front door. "Drive safe," he said. "I will." I reached for the handle. "Ethan." I turned. For half a second, something changed in his face. His mouth opened, as if another sentence had been waiting behind the first one all evening. Then it disappeared. "Good seeing you." "You too, Dad." I stepped outside. The October air was cool enough that I could see a trace of my breath under the porch light. I walked down the driveway, got into my Honda, and sat there without starting it. Through the living room window, I could see Dad collecting coffee mugs from the side table. He looked older than he had a year ago. Smaller somehow. That bothered me more than his question. I started the car and drove home through quiet suburban streets lined with maple trees turning orange and red. His words followed me all 12 miles. "What are you trying to prove?" I had spent years pretending the answer was simple. I wanted independence. I wanted to build something. I wanted to know what I was capable of. All of those things were true. They just weren't the whole truth. When I reached my house, I left the lights off and stood in the kitchen staring at the dark windows over the sink. My phone buzzed against the counter. It was an email from Daniel Brooks, my business partner. The subject line was only 4 words. "We need to talk." I opened it. Daniel had forwarded a message from a company we'd been negotiating with for months. I read the first paragraph once. Then again. They weren't proposing another partnership. They wanted to acquire us. I scrolled down until I reached the number. $12 million. I pulled out a chair and sat down. 8 years earlier, I had come back to my parents' house with 2 suitcases, a nearly empty bank account, and a failed company nobody remembered. Now someone was offering 8 figures for the second company I'd built from the ground up. This should have been the moment. The finish line. The proof. I should have called Daniel. I should have opened a bottle of something expensive. Instead, I sat alone in my dark kitchen thinking about my father asking why I was still chasing success. Then I remembered something he had said to me 8 years earlier, on the worst night of my professional life. A sentence I had never repeated to anyone. Suddenly, the $12 million on my screen didn't feel like money. It felt like an answer. The number on my screen should have made me feel victorious. Instead, it carried me back to a baseball field 27 years earlier, when I was 11 years old and still believed my father's approval was something I could earn if I just worked hard enough. I remember standing near the dugout after a Saturday game, my white uniform stained with Ohio dirt, holding a cheap plastic trophy our coach had given me for being the team's most improved player. Mom hugged me first. Claire, who was 7 then, complained that everyone else got ice cream before she did. Dad waited beside our station wagon with his hands in his jacket pockets. I walked toward him holding that trophy where he could see it. Coach said I improved more than anybody this season. I told him. Dad looked at the trophy, then at me. Good, he said. Keep working. That was all. 2 words of praise followed by an instruction to become better. At 11, I did not understand why those words stayed with me. I only knew that on Monday afternoon, while my friends rode their bikes around the neighborhood, I asked Mom to drive me back to the batting cages. That became the pattern of my childhood. Dad was always there, but he was rarely impressed. When I brought home an A on a science test, he asked what I had missed. When I made the junior varsity baseball team in high school, he asked whether I planned to make varsity the following year. When I earned a scholarship that covered part of my college tuition, he reminded me that I would still need a job. None of those statements were unreasonable. That was what made them so difficult to explain to anyone else. Robert Walker never called me worthless. He never told me to give up. He simply moved the finish line every time I reached it. Mom was different. She celebrated everything. A good grade meant my favorite dinner. A promotion meant a cake from the bakery near their house. She kept photographs on the refrigerator until the corners curled. Dad believed celebration should come after the work was finished. The problem was that, according to him, the work was never finished. By the time I graduated from Ohio State University, I had learned not to expect much. The ceremony was held on a bright spring afternoon, and afterward we stood outside taking pictures. Mom kept adjusting my graduation gown. Claire made fun of the square cap sitting crooked on my head. Dad stood beside me for one photograph, his hand resting briefly on my shoulder. I remember looking at him after Mom lowered the camera. I had imagined that moment for years. I thought he might finally say it. For simple words. I am proud of you. Instead, he asked, when does that job in Cincinnati start? 3 weeks. Good company? I think so. He nodded. Then show up early. I laughed because everyone else did. Dad smiled and walked toward the parking lot. Nobody noticed that I stayed behind for another second. My first corporate job paid $52,000 a year, which felt enormous to a 22-year-old who had spent college checking his bank balance before ordering pizza. I rented a small apartment, bought a used Honda Civic, and worked harder than anyone asked me to. I arrived before 8 every morning. I volunteered for assignments other people avoided. I answered emails late at night. Within 18 months, I received my first promotion. I called Mom from the parking garage. She nearly shouted into the phone. Then she put Dad on. They promoted me, I said. Already? Yes. There was a pause. That is good, Ethan. I waited. More responsibility? A lot more. Then make sure you are ready for it. There it was again. Keep working. Show up early. Be ready. Every achievement became preparation for the next test. I told myself it motivated me. For years, I even thanked him for it. By 27, I had moved back to Columbus and was earning more money than I had ever expected at that age. I had a retirement account, health insurance, paid vacation, and a manager who had already mentioned putting me on a leadership track. Dad loved that job for me. Whenever relatives asked what I was doing, he could explain it in one clean sentence. Ethan works for a solid technology company. I should have been happy there. Some days I was. But late at night, I kept opening a folder on my laptop filled with plans for a business of my own. It started as an idea for helping small companies manage software systems without paying the enormous consulting fees charged by larger firms. I built spreadsheets. I researched competitors. I calculated what I would need to survive for 12 months without a steady paycheck. I told no one except Daniel Brooks, a coworker who had become one of my closest friends. Daniel thought the idea could work. Dad thought differently. I finally told him during a summer cookout in my parents' backyard. He was standing beside the grill when I said I was considering leaving my job. He stopped turning the burgers and looked at me as if I had announced that I planned to throw my savings into the Scioto River. For what? He asked. To start my own company. You already have a company. I work for a company. Exactly. They pay you every 2 weeks. I tried to explain the business plan. He listened quietly. That was worse than arguing. When I finished, he closed the grill lid. You have benefits. A retirement plan. A future there. Why gamble all of that? Because I think I can build something better. Dad looked toward the house, where Mom and Claire were carrying food onto the patio table. Then he looked back at me. Thinking you can do something and being able to do it are two different things. I felt those words settle somewhere deep. So you do not think I can? I think you have a good life. I do not understand why that is never enough for you. Years later, sitting alone in my kitchen with a $12 million offer glowing on my phone, I realized I had been trying to answer that question ever since. 3 months after that cookout, I resigned from the safest job I had ever had. I was 29 years old, single, carrying no debt except a modest car payment, and sitting on a little more than $40,000 in savings. On paper, it looked calculated. In reality, I was terrified. Daniel helped me build the first version of the business, but he kept his regular job because he had a mortgage and responsibilities I did not have. I rented a tiny office above an insurance agency on the north side of Columbus for $600 a month. The carpet was gray, the fluorescent lights hummed, and the window faced a brick wall about 15 feet away. I loved it. The first morning, I arrived at 7:15 with a cardboard box containing my laptop, a coffee maker, 2 mugs, and a framed photograph Mom had given me after college. I set everything on a second-hand desk and stared at the empty room. No manager. No salary. No company benefits. Just me and a business name printed on $20 cards. I remember thinking that freedom felt remarkably similar to fear. The first client came after 17 days. A small accounting firm needed help replacing an outdated software system. The contract was worth $4,800. I called Mom immediately. Then I called Dad. First customer, I told him. Good, he said. I smiled before he could continue. I already knew what was coming. Now get the second one. For a while I did. A dental practice hired me. Then a local distributor. Then a family-owned construction company. By the end of my first year, the business had generated enough revenue to convince me I had made the right decision, but not enough profit to make me comfortable. I stopped buying lunch and packed sandwiches instead. I kept the thermostat low in winter. I drove the same Honda everywhere because replacing it felt irresponsible. None of that bothered me. I had expected sacrifice. What I had not expected was how quickly a few lost clients could erase months of progress. In the second year, my largest customer was acquired by a national company and canceled our contract. Another client delayed a major project. Then a company that owed me nearly $20,000 ran into financial trouble and stopped paying its vendors on time. I kept telling myself the next month would be better. March became April. April became June. My savings dropped below $10,000. I stopped paying myself regularly. Daniel came to the office one Thursday evening and found me sitting in front of a spreadsheet filled with red numbers. How bad? He asked. Manageable. He pulled up a chair. That is not a number. I turned the laptop toward him. He studied the screen for almost a minute. Ethan, I know. You have maybe 10 weeks. 12 if I cut everything. Daniel leaned back. And after 12? I did not answer. That was the first night I admitted the company might fail. Not to Dad. Not to Mom. Not even completely to Daniel. I admitted it to myself while driving home after midnight on Interstate 71 with almost no traffic around me. I had imagined failure as a dramatic moment. It was not. It was a collection of ordinary things. An invoice that stayed unpaid. A phone that stopped ringing. A checking account that became smaller every Friday. An office lease that still arrived on the first of the month. By August, I had exhausted nearly everything I could responsibly put into the company. I closed the office, sold 2 computers, canceled the remaining subscriptions, and mailed final checks to the contractors who had helped me. I paid everyone before I paid myself. When it was finished, I had less than $3,000 left. My apartment lease expired that same month. Renewing it would have meant pretending I still had income one did not have. So at 29 years old, 7 years after leaving my parents' house, I packed my life into 2 suitcases and 6 cardboard boxes. Mom knew I was coming. Dad did not. I arrived on a rainy Tuesday evening. Their garage door was open, and Dad was standing at his workbench repairing an old table lamp. He looked toward the driveway as I pulled in. Then he saw the boxes in the back seat. His expression changed. He wiped his hands on a rag and walked outside. "What happened?" he asked. There was no reason to decorate the truth. "The company is done." Dad looked at me for a long moment. "Done?" I closed it. He glanced through the car window at my belongings. "And your apartment?" "Lease ended." Another pause. "Your savings?" "Mostly gone." Mom appeared in the doorway behind him. She took one look at my car and understood. "Your room is ready whenever you need it," she said. I had not asked her to prepare it. Somehow that made it harder. Dad picked up one of the boxes without saying anything and carried it inside. We made 3 trips from the car. Nobody discussed the business until later that night. Mom had gone upstairs. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I did not want when Dad came in. He opened the refrigerator, stared inside, then closed it without taking anything. "You gave it everything?" he asked. "Yes." "No shortcuts?" "No," he nodded slowly. For one foolish second, I thought he was going to tell me he respected that. Instead, he pulled out the chair across from me. "This is why I wanted you to keep the other job." I stared into my coffee. "I know. You had security, Ethan. I know. Benefits. Savings. A career path. Dad, I know." He stopped. The refrigerator hummed behind him. Rain tapped against the kitchen window. Then he said the sentence that followed me for the next 8 years. "Maybe some people are not meant to build something of their own." I looked up. He seemed almost sorry after saying it, but he did not take it back. I nodded once, carried my coffee to the sink, and went upstairs to the bedroom I had slept in as a teenager. The baseball trophy was still on a shelf in the closet. I picked it up, wiped the dust from the plastic figure, and remembered what Dad had told me when I was 11. Keep working. So that was exactly what I decided to do. Not tomorrow. Not after I recovered. That night, I opened my laptop at the old desk beneath my bedroom window, created a new document, and typed one sentence at the top of the page. The first company had failed. That did not mean I had. I did not build the second company the next morning. That would make the story cleaner than it really was. The next morning, I woke in my childhood bedroom at 6:20, put on the only suit that still fit properly, and started applying for jobs. I needed income before I needed another dream. Within 5 weeks, I was working for a mid-sized technology consulting firm in downtown Columbus. The salary was lower than the one I had walked away from 2 years earlier, but I accepted without negotiating. I rented a small apartment 10 miles from my parents' house, moved my 6 boxes out of their spare room, and promised myself I would never return carrying everything I owned in the back seat of a car. During the day, I became the employee every manager wanted. I arrived early. I stayed late when a project required it. I learned systems nobody else wanted to learn. I kept notes on everything. At night, I went home, heated whatever dinner required the least preparation, and opened the document I had started in my old bedroom. The first company had failed. That did not mean I had. That sentence became less of an encouragement and more of a rule. I studied every mistake I had made. My first company had depended too heavily on a handful of clients. I had spent money too quickly when revenue increased. I had confused being busy with being stable. Most importantly, I had built a business around what I wanted to sell instead of what customers repeatedly needed. So I began listening. At work, small business owners kept asking the same questions. How could they manage software costs? How could they connect systems that were never designed to work together? How could they get reliable support without signing enormous contracts with national consulting firms? I wrote the questions down. I did not tell Dad. For almost a year, Sunday dinners stayed safe. Mom asked about my apartment. Claire talked about her job. Dad asked whether my employer offered a retirement match. I told him yes. He seemed relieved. That relief irritated me more than criticism would have. It felt as though my failure had returned me to the version of myself he preferred. One Friday night, Daniel came over with 2 pizzas and found my dining table covered with notebooks. "Please tell me you are not doing this again," he said. "I am not doing it again." I slid a notebook toward him. "I am doing it differently." He read for 10 minutes without speaking. Then he looked at me. "This is better. That is not the same as good." Daniel smiled. "You really are Robert Walker's son." I did not laugh. 6 months later, we signed our first client together. I kept my full-time job. Daniel kept his. We worked evenings and Saturdays from my apartment. There was no office this time. No new furniture. No printed business cards unless we needed them. Our first invoice was $1,200. I left the money in the company account. The second invoice was $1,800. I left that there too. By the end of the first year, the company had earned a little over $60,000 in revenue. I did not tell Dad. By the end of the second year, revenue crossed $200,000. Daniel reduced his hours at his regular job. I still did not tell Dad. I had convinced myself I was protecting the business from his skepticism. The truth was less flattering. I wanted to wait until the number was large enough that he could not dismiss it. When I finally resigned from my job again, I was 32. This time I had 18 months of personal expenses saved and recurring contracts covering the company's basic costs. I told Mom first, then Claire. Dad found out at Sunday dinner. He put down his coffee. "You left another good job?" "Yes." "For the business?" "Yes." "How long has this been going on?" 2 years. He stared at me. "You have been running a company for 2 years and never mentioned it." I wanted to make sure it was real. Dad nodded slowly. "Is it?" I should have heard curiosity. I heard doubt. "It will be." That answer became fuel. We hired our first employee 3 months later. Then our second. Revenue passed $500,000. We moved into a modest office suite near Worthington with 4 rooms, a conference table Daniel bought used, and a coffee machine that leaked if someone filled it past the line. I loved that place more than the polished office I had abandoned years earlier. Every dollar had been earned before it was spent. Every client mattered. Every mistake was examined instead of hidden. When revenue reached $1 million, Daniel brought a grocery store cake to the office. The frosting said 1 million in blue letters. Everyone laughed because the bakery had squeezed the words together crookedly. I took a photograph and almost sent it to Dad. My thumb hovered over his name. Then I remembered the kitchen table. Maybe some people are not meant to build something of their own. I locked my phone and put it away. At $2 million, I bought a house. At $3 million, we hired a chief operating officer. At $5 million, I finally stopped checking the company bank account before going to sleep. Yet none of those milestones felt the way I expected. Each one gave me satisfaction for a day, sometimes an hour. Then the old question returned. What next? More clients. More employees. Another state. Another year. Another number. Daniel noticed before I did. One evening, after everyone else had left, he stood in my office doorway and asked, "What exactly are you trying to reach?" I looked at the sales forecast on my monitor. Growth. That is a business answer. We run a business. I am asking you. I leaned back in my chair. Outside my window, the parking lot was nearly empty. I do not know. Daniel nodded as if that answer confirmed something. You should figure it out. I did not. I kept working. By 38, the company had 23 employees and clients in 6 states. Then a national firm began asking questions about acquiring us. I told myself I was evaluating an opportunity. But when their offer finally arrived, $12 million did not make me think about retirement, travel, or financial freedom. My first thought was embarrassingly simple. I wondered what Dad would say when he saw the number. And that was when I began to understand that for 8 years, I had not been running toward success. I had been running toward one conversation. I stared at the $12 million offer until the screen dimmed and my reflection replaced the numbers. Then I touched the trackpad, and there they were again. $12 million. Daniel called before I could decide whether I wanted him to. You saw it, he asked. I saw it. And I looked around my kitchen. Nothing had changed. Same oak cabinets. Same coffee mug beside the sink. Same stack of unopened mail near the fruit bowl. I do not know. Daniel laughed once. That might be the first time I have heard you say that about anything. The offer was not $12 million in my pocket. Taxes, ownership percentages, transaction costs, and employee agreements would all matter. Daniel and I had discussed those details for months. Still, it was more money than either of us had imagined when we worked from my apartment after our regular jobs. They want an answer by Friday, Daniel said. I know. We should meet with the attorney tomorrow. Set it up. I ended the call and opened the offer again. My eyes kept returning to the same number, but my mind kept returning to my father's kitchen 8 years earlier. Maybe some people are not meant to build something of their own. I had imagined proving him wrong so many times that the imaginary conversation had become almost embarrassing. In some versions, I handed him a newspaper article. In others, he walked into my office and saw 50 employees. Sometimes I pictured telling him what the company was worth and watching his expression change. Now I had the number. I could drive 12 miles to my parents' house, put my phone on the table, and show him exactly what someone was willing to pay for the thing he once thought I might not be capable of building. I did not go. The next morning, Daniel and I met with our attorney in a conference room overlooking downtown Columbus. We spent nearly 3 hours discussing terms, retention agreements, client obligations, employee protections, transition periods. By noon, I had filled 6 pages of a legal pad with notes. Daniel seemed energized. I felt strangely detached. When the meeting ended, he waited until the attorney left before speaking. You are quiet. There is a lot to consider. There is always a lot to consider. That has never stopped you from having an opinion. I closed the folder in front of me. Would you sell, if the terms stay close to this? Yes. Immediately. Not immediately. I would negotiate. He smiled. Then I would sign with a very expensive pen. I looked through the window at the buildings below us. What if we can make the company worth twice this in 5 years? Daniel leaned against the table. We might. 3 times. Maybe. Then why sell now? Because that question never ends. I looked at him. His voice softened. 24 million becomes 40. 40 becomes 60. At some point, Ethan, you have to know what the number is for. That afternoon, I returned to the office and tried to work. One of our project managers asked me to approve a hiring request. A client wanted to move a meeting. Someone had left donuts in the break room. Everything was ordinary, which felt almost insulting considering the decision sitting in my email. Around 4:30, I opened a blank message addressed to Dad. I typed, got an offer for the company today. I deleted it. Then I typed, someone offered $12 million for what I built. I deleted that too. The second version sounded like a son holding up a trophy in a parking lot. I closed the message. At 6:12, Mom called. I nearly let it go to voicemail because I was still reviewing financial projections. Something made me answer. Hey, Mom. She did not say hello. Ethan, I need you to come to Riverside. I stood up. What happened? Your father got lightheaded at the hardware store. They brought him to the hospital to make sure everything is all right. Her voice was controlled, but I could hear how carefully she was controlling it. Is he awake? Yes. He is talking. He is already complaining about the television. That sounded like Dad. I am leaving now. I closed my laptop and drove to Riverside Methodist Hospital through evening traffic. The trip took 28 minutes. I remember every red light because each one felt longer than usual. I also remember feeling ashamed that the $12 million offer followed me there. Not because money mattered more than Dad. It did not. But because I had spent so many years preparing to show him that number, and suddenly the possibility that I might not get the chance made the whole thing feel small. Mom was sitting beside him when I entered the room. Claire arrived 10 minutes later. Dad looked tired but alert. This is unnecessary, he said. Apparently, I am being held hostage by people with medical degrees. Mom rolled her eyes. You nearly fainted beside the power tools. I sat down. On the floor. The floor was available. Claire laughed, and the tension eased. The doctors were running tests and expected to keep him overnight for observation. Nothing they had told us suggested an immediate crisis, but they wanted to understand why he had become dizzy. Dad hated every minute of it. I stayed until after 10. When Mom and Claire went to get coffee, Dad and I were alone. He looked at my work clothes. You came straight from the office? Yes. Busy day? I almost laughed. You could say that. He waited. I could have told him. The offer was sitting on my phone 6 inches from my hand. Instead, I asked, do you need anything from home? Dad thought for a moment. My reading glasses. Phone charger. The blue sweater from the bedroom chair. I can get them. Your mother can. I will do it. He studied me, then nodded. I drove to my parents' house with their spare key. The rooms felt different without them there. Quiet. Temporary. I found the glasses and charger upstairs, but the blue sweater was not in the bedroom. Mom texted that Dad might have left it in the garage after working outside that morning. I went downstairs and opened the door beside the kitchen. The garage smelled like sawdust, motor oil, and the coffee Dad sometimes forgot on his workbench. His sweater was hanging over the back of a chair. I picked it up. As I turned to leave, I noticed an old cardboard box on the shelf above his workbench. My name was written across the side in Dad's block handwriting. Ethan. I stood there holding the sweater. I had never seen that box before. I reached up, pulled it down, and set it on the workbench. The cardboard was worn. The tape had been opened and replaced more than once. For several seconds, I told myself to leave it alone. Then I lifted the lid. The first thing I saw was a newspaper clipping with my face on it. It came from a small Columbus business journal 3 years earlier, when our company had been featured in a story about growing local technology firms. I remembered the photograph because Daniel had complained that I looked like I was waiting at the Department of Motor Vehicles. I had never shown the article to Dad. I had never even mentioned it. Yet there it was, folded neatly inside his box. Underneath, it was one of the original business cards from my first company, the one that failed. The corners were worn. I picked it up and turned it over. Dad had written a date on the back. It was the date I signed my first client. I stood motionless beside his workbench. The garage suddenly felt very quiet. I reached deeper into the box. There was a photograph from my college graduation. Another from the first office Daniel and I rented near Worthington. A printed copy of the announcement we had posted online when we hired our 10th employee. An article about a community project our company had completed for a local nonprofit. A photograph Mom had taken at the grocery store celebration when our revenue crossed $1 million. I remembered that cake. I remembered deciding not to send Dad the picture. Somehow he had it anyway. Beneath the photographs was a folder with my name written across the front. Inside were pages printed from our company website, press releases, client announcements, an interview I had given to a regional business podcast. Dad had highlighted one sentence where I talked about learning more from my first failure than from any later success. I sat on the wooden stool beside his workbench. For 8 years, I had imagined Dad ignoring everything I built. The evidence in front of me said he had been watching closely. I pulled out another envelope. It contained a check register from an old savings account. Several entries had been circled. One was dated 2 weeks after I moved back home following the failure of my first company. $10,000 had been transferred into that account. Another $5,000 appeared the following month. Neither amount had ever reached me. I did not understand until I found a note clipped behind the register in Mom's handwriting. Robert, if Ethan needs help with the business debts, use this first. Do not tell him unless he asks. I read it twice. Then a third time. Dad had prepared $15,000 to help me when I had almost nothing. He had never offered it. I had never asked. The money remained untouched. I should have felt grateful. Instead, I felt confused. Why prepare to help me privately and tell me at the kitchen table that maybe I was not meant to build something of my own? Why save every article and never say he had read one? Why keep photographs of milestones he barely acknowledged? At the bottom of the box was a white envelope with my name on it. Unlike everything else, it was sealed. The handwriting was Dad's. I looked toward the open garage door, half expecting him to walk in and ask what I was doing. Then I remembered he was still at Riverside waiting for test results. I should have put the envelope back. I knew that. But my name was written on the front, and 8 years of unanswered questions were sitting inside that box. I opened it carefully. The letter was dated 4 years earlier, shortly after Daniel and I moved into our first real office. Dad had written it by hand on yellow legal paper. Ethan, I drove past your office today. I did not go inside because I did not know whether you would want me there. I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes and watched people carrying boxes through the front door. I assumed they work for you. That sentence made me stop. I remembered that moving day. For employees, Daniel's pickup truck, a rented moving van. Somebody had brought coffee. I had no idea Dad had been sitting outside. I continued reading. You probably think I never believed you could do this. Maybe I gave you reasons to think that. When your first business failed, I wanted you to come home because I knew you needed somewhere safe to land. I also wanted to tell you to try again. I could not make myself say it. I was afraid another failure would cost you more than money. I kept reading, slower now. Dad wrote about his own 20s, about working at the manufacturing plant, about an idea he once had with a friend for a small repair business. They had priced equipment, looked at rental spaces, even spoken to a bank. Then Dad backed out. He chose the steady paycheck. His friend opened the business without him and eventually did well. Dad wrote that he never regretted providing for our family, but sometimes wondered whether caution had become the excuse he used whenever he was afraid. Then I reached the sentence that changed the meaning of almost everything I remembered. When you left your job the first time, I was not angry because I thought you were foolish. I was afraid because you were willing to do something I had never been brave enough to do. I lowered the letter. The garage blurred for a second, and I looked away toward the driveway until my eyes settled. There was more. When your company failed, I told myself I had been right. The truth is that seeing you come home scared me because I knew what I would have done in your place. I would have stopped. I thought telling you to be realistic would protect you. Instead, I may have made you believe I expected you to fail. I am sorry for that. The final lines were shorter. I am proud of what you are building. More than that, I am proud that you tried again. I hope someday I learn how to say these things without needing a piece of paper. Dad. I sat there with the letter resting in my hands. For years, I had carried one sentence from that kitchen table as if it were the complete truth about my father. Now another truth was sitting in front of me, written by the same man, for years earlier, and never delivered. My phone buzzed. It was Mom. The doctors expected Dad to be fine. She asked whether I had found his sweater. I looked at the blue sweater beside the open box. Then I looked at the letter. Yes, I told her. I found more than that. I folded the letter along the same creases my father had made 4 years earlier and placed it back inside the envelope. Then I stood in his garage with the blue sweater over one arm and the box open in front of me, trying to decide which version of Robert Walker was real. The man who had saved every article about my company, or the man who had looked across a kitchen table and told me that maybe I was not meant to build something of my own. The answer, uncomfortable as it was, seemed to be both. I returned everything to the box except the letter. I slipped that into the inside pocket of my coat, turned off the garage light, and drove back to Riverside Methodist Hospital. Mom was asleep in a chair when I arrived. Claire had gone home. Dad was awake, wearing his reading glasses and complaining that the hospital coffee tasted like warm cardboard. I handed him his sweater and charger. Thanks, he said. I sat beside the bed. The letter felt heavier than paper against my chest. Dad noticed me watching him. What? Nothing. You have been staring at me for 30 seconds. I reached into my coat and placed the envelope on the small table between us. His face changed immediately. He recognized it. Where did you get that? Your garage. Dad looked at the envelope but did not touch it. You read it. My name was on it. That does not answer the question. Yes. He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he said, I never meant for you to find it like that. How did you mean for me to find it? He gave a tired smile. Apparently, I did not have a plan. I looked at the envelope. 4 years, Dad. I know. You wrote that 4 years ago. I know. Why did you never give it to me? He turned toward the dark hospital window. Because every time I thought about it, it seemed too late. Too late to tell your son you were proud of him. His jaw tightened slightly. When you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous. It feels ridiculous. He nodded. I expected him to defend himself. He did not. That made it harder to stay angry. You know what I remember about the night my first company failed? I asked. You coming home. I remember sitting at the kitchen table. I remember the ring. I remember exactly where your coffee mug was. Dad looked at me. And I remember what you said. He closed his eyes briefly. So do I. I built 8 years of my life around that sentence. His eyes opened. Ethan, I am not saying you caused everything I did. Those were my choices. But every time I wanted to stop, I heard you. Every time the company grew, I wondered whether it was finally enough to prove you wrong. Dad looked down at his hands. They seemed older under the hospital lights. I thought I was protecting you. From what? From becoming me. I said nothing. Dad leaned back against the pillow. You read the part about the repair shop. Yes. Your mother was pregnant with you when I had that opportunity. We had a mortgage. I had health insurance through the plant. My father thought leaving was foolish. I agreed with him because agreeing was easier than admitting I was scared. He paused. My friend opened the shop anyway. He worked out of a rented garage for years. Eventually, he bought the building. Did you regret staying? Sometimes. He looked at me. But regret is complicated. Staying gave me your mother. You. Claire. A house. College funds. A pension. I would not trade those things. What I regretted was letting fear make the decision and then pretending it had been wisdom. The words settled quietly between us. I had spent years imagining my father as a man completely certain of every decision he made. I had never considered that certainty might have been something he performed. When you quit your job, he continued, I saw all the risks. I could list them because I had listed them for myself 25 years earlier. When your company failed, I thought I had proof that caution was right. So you told me I was not meant for it. Yes. He swallowed. And then you tried again. Dad looked at the envelope. That was the part one did not understand. You failed and somehow became more determined. I had spent my whole life believing failure was the thing you avoided. You treated it like information. I almost smiled. Expensive information. Very expensive. We both laughed quietly. Then the room became still again. Why save everything? I asked. The articles. The pictures. My old business card. Dad shrugged, but there was nothing casual about his expression. Because I was proud of you. Hearing the words should have fixed something. Instead, I felt an unexpected ache. I needed you to say that 8 years ago. I know. I probably needed it when I was 11. Dad looked at me for a long time. I know that too. There was no dramatic apology. No perfect speech. Just an old man in a hospital bed realizing that love kept private can feel remarkably similar to love withheld. I took a slow breath. I got an offer for the company today. Dad's eyebrows lifted. An offer? Someone wants to buy it. For how much? I hesitated. This was the moment I had imagined for years. I could finally place the number between us like evidence. $12 million. Dad stared at me. I watched his face, waiting for satisfaction, surprise, maybe even disbelief. Instead, he asked the one question I had never prepared for. Do you want to sell? I do not know. Then the number does not answer the important question. I almost laughed at the irony. You really cannot just be impressed for 5 minutes, can you? Dad smiled. I am impressed. Then his expression softened. But I do not want you making another 8 years of decisions because of something I said. I looked down at the letter between us. For most of my adult life, I thought I had been racing my father. Sitting there, I finally understood something I should have seen years earlier. He had never been running against me. I had been running alone, carrying his voice with me and calling it competition. Dad reached for his glasses. Whatever you decide about the company, Ethan, do not make the decision for me. I looked at him. Then who am I supposed to make it for? He put his glasses back on and gave me a tired, almost amused look. You are 38 years old. I think it is time you figured that out. Dad came home from the hospital the following afternoon with instructions to rest, drink more water, and schedule a follow-up appointment with his doctor. Mom treated those instructions like federal law. Dad treated them like suggestions written by people who did not understand that the garage contained unfinished projects. Before I left their house, he stopped me at the front door. Friday, he said. What about it? That is when they want your answer, right? I had forgotten telling him the deadline. Yes. He nodded. Then you have 2 days. That is usually how calendars work. Do not get smart with your father. For the first time in years, the remarks sounded almost comforting. I drove to the office Wednesday morning and found Daniel already in the conference room with coffee, financial reports, and a legal pad covered in his handwriting. We spent most of the day reviewing the acquisition offer line by line. The buyer wanted our client contracts, our software processes, our brand, and a transition period during which Daniel and I would remain with the company. Their revised terms were generous. Our employees would keep their jobs. Key managers would receive retention bonuses. Daniel would stay for 18 months. I would stay for 12. After that, I could walk away. This is a good deal, Daniel said. I know. You keep saying that like you are trying to convince yourself it is a bad one. I looked at the pages spread across the table. What would you do afterward? Take my wife somewhere with no email for a month. Then probably start something else. So you would sell and build again? Maybe. He leaned back. But I would not build the same company again just to prove I could. That sentence stayed with me. Thursday morning, I arrived before everyone else. The office was dark except for the lights above reception. I walked through the rooms slowly. 23 desks. Whiteboards filled with project notes. Coffee cups people had forgotten to take home. A birthday card taped beside one monitor. 8 years earlier, I had measured success with survival. Then revenue. Then employees. Then valuation. Every time I reached one number, I replaced it with another. I sat in my office and opened two documents on my computer. One was the acquisition agreement. The other was our 5-year growth plan. For the first time, I tried to look at both without imagining Dad's reaction. It was surprisingly difficult. I closed my eyes and asked myself a question that should have been simple. If Dad had never doubted me, what would I want? The answer did not come immediately. I spent most of Thursday talking with department leaders without mentioning the offer. I asked what they thought the company did well and what they would change. One wanted better training. Another wanted us to stop accepting projects that were profitable but did not fit our strengths. Our chief operating officer, Melissa Carter, said something I wrote down afterward. We grew because we were small enough to care and experienced enough to solve real problems. If we get bigger, we cannot lose the first part. That evening, I went home and opened Dad's letter again. I read the sentence about his repair business. He had not regretted choosing stability. He regretted allowing fear to make the choice while pretending the choice had been something else. I realized I was standing in the opposite version of the same trap. I could sell because $12 million looked like proof. Or I could refuse because growing to $24 million would look like stronger proof. Either decision could still belong to my father instead of me. Friday morning, Daniel and I met at 7:30. I know what I want, I said. That sounds dangerous. I do not want to sell the whole company. Daniel studied me. Because you think the price is too low? No. Because you think we can double it? Probably, but no. He waited. Then why? I turned the acquisition agreement toward him. Because I still want to build this. Not to make it bigger for the sake of bigger. I want to make it better. I want fewer clients that do not fit us. Better margins. Better systems. I want Melissa running more of the daily operations. I want us to stop acting like every opportunity is an emergency. Daniel smiled slightly. You have been listening. Occasionally. What are you proposing? We spent the next 3 hours developing a counteroffer. Instead of selling the entire company, we proposed a minority investment and strategic partnership. The buyer would receive a significant ownership stake and access to certain services, while Daniel and I retained control. It meant less money immediately. Much less. It also meant we could reward employees, strengthen the company, and continue building without turning our work over completely to someone else. At 11:40, our attorney looked at me across the conference table. You understand they may reject this? Yes. And if they do, the original offer may not remain available. I understand. He looked at Daniel. Daniel nodded. Send it. The email went out at 11:47. Nothing dramatic happened. No applause. No music. Just a small notification confirming that the message had been sent. I expected panic. Instead, I felt something unfamiliar. Quiet. At 2:15, Dad called. Did you decide? I made a counteroffer. For more money? Actually, for less. Silence. I may need you to explain business to me again. I laughed. I do not want to sell all of it. Why not? I looked through the glass wall of my office at the people working outside. Because I still like what I am building. Dad was quiet for a moment. That sounds like a better reason than proving something to an old man. It is. Good. I waited for the usual second half. Keep working. Be careful. Make sure you are ready. It never came. Dad simply said, then I hope they say yes. The buyer responded Monday afternoon. They accepted the structure with several conditions our attorney believed were reasonable. Daniel walked into my office carrying the email on his tablet. Well, he said, you just turned down the biggest payday of your life. I looked at him. Does that bother you? Ask me after my wife sees the numbers. Then he smiled. No, we still did very well. After he left, I sat alone for a minute. I thought about the 11-year-old boy holding a plastic trophy, waiting for his father to tell him it was enough. I thought about the 29-year-old man unpacking boxes in his childhood bedroom. I thought about every milestone I had treated like evidence in a case nobody had asked me to argue. For the first time, success did not feel like a scoreboard. It felt like being able to choose what came next without needing anyone else to tell me whether I had won. 3 months later, Dad walked into my office carrying a cardboard tray with 4 coffees and wearing the same blue sweater I had brought him at the hospital. He stopped just inside the front door and looked around as if he had entered a place he had only seen in photographs. In a way, he had. The box in his garage had contained years of my company from a distance. Articles, pictures, announcements, pieces of a life he had followed without stepping into it. You found it, I said. Dad lifted the coffee tray. Your mother gave me the address. You have had the address for years. I said I found it. I did not say it was difficult. I laughed and took 2 of the cups from him. The office looked different from the place we had occupied when revenue first crossed $1 million. We had expanded into the suite next door. The conference room was larger. The furniture matched now. Melissa had reorganized our project teams, and Daniel had finally replaced the coffee machine that leaked whenever anyone filled it too high. But it was still our company. The investment agreement had closed 6 weeks earlier. The new capital allowed us to pay employee bonuses, improve our internal systems, and turn down projects that did not fit the kind of business we wanted to become. Daniel still occasionally reminded me that I had traded a much larger immediate payout for more work. He usually did it while smiling. Dad handed 1 coffee to Melissa when she passed us in the hallway. "You must be Robert," she said. Dad looked at me. "What have you been telling these people?" "Only the flattering parts." "Then she probably has no idea who I am." Melissa laughed and continued toward the conference room. Dad watched employees moving between desks. 23, he asked. 25 now. You hired 2 more? Last month. He nodded. I waited for the familiar warning about payroll, growth, or moving too quickly. Instead, he said, "They look happy." That surprised me. Most days. I showed him around. He asked practical questions, of course. Dad would always be Dad. How long was the lease? Did we own the servers? How much space did we have left if we hired more people? But there was something different in the way he asked. He was curious, not evaluating. When we reached my office, he stopped at the doorway. On the shelf behind my desk was the cheap plastic baseball trophy from when I was 11. I had found it in my parents' closet years earlier and eventually brought it to work as a reminder of where certain habits began. Dad walked over and picked it up. I remember this. Most improved player. You could barely hit the ball at the beginning of that season. Thank you for preserving the inspirational tone of the memory. He smiled. You worked every afternoon until you got better. I remember what you said when I showed you the trophy. His smile faded slightly. Keep working. Exactly. He turned the plastic figure in his hand. I thought that was encouragement. I know. I was not very good at encouragement. No, Dad looked at me. You do not have to agree that quickly. I laughed. He placed the trophy back on the shelf. Then he noticed something else. His letter was framed beside it. Not the entire letter, just the final page with the lines about being proud that I had tried again. He stood still for a moment. You framed that. Eventually. I would have written more neatly if I knew. You had 4 years to rewrite it. He nodded. Fair point. We sat down. Outside my glass wall, Daniel was arguing cheerfully with someone about a project schedule. Phones rang. A printer started. Someone laughed near the break room. Dad looked through the glass. So what happens now? We grow carefully. Maybe 30 employees by next year. We are opening a small service team in Cincinnati. Melissa is taking over more operations. And you? That question would once have produced a list of targets. Revenue goals. Client counts. Expansion plans. Numbers I could point to and call progress. I am trying to leave the office before 7 more often. Dad raised his eyebrows. That's serious? Very. Your mother will be relieved. I smiled. I still want to build, Dad. I still want the company to grow. I just do not want every good thing to become evidence that I deserve the next good thing. He looked down at his coffee. That sounds healthier than anything I taught you. You taught me plenty. Such as, show up early. Good advice. Work hard. Also good. Never celebrate anything for more than 12 seconds. I may have overdone that one. We both smiled. Then he looked at me with an expression I could not immediately read. That Sunday dinner, he said. When I asked why you kept pushing. I nodded. I have thought about your answer. I did not say anything. I think I understand it now. I am not sure I understood it then. What did you mean? I looked through the glass at the company I had spent 8 years building. Back then, I think I meant I had not proved enough yet. Dad listened. Every milestone was supposed to be the one that finally made me feel finished. The first client. The first million. The house. 20 employees. Then the offer. None of it worked. And now, I thought about that 11-year-old boy holding up a plastic trophy. I thought about the 29-year-old man returning home with 2 suitcases. I thought about the 38-year-old man sitting beside his father in a hospital room and discovering that the race he had spent years trying to win had existed mostly inside his own head. Now I think I was trying to become someone I could respect without checking whether you respected him first. Dad lowered his eyes for a moment. When he looked back at me, his voice was quieter. I do respect him. I nodded. I know. He took a breath. And I am proud of you, son. There it was. For words I had waited nearly my entire life to hear. They mattered. I would be lying if I said they did not. But they landed differently than I had imagined. They did not complete me. They did not erase 8 years. They did not turn $12 million into a trophy. They simply came from my father, and that was enough. Thanks, Dad. He smiled. So, are you finished now? I looked at the trophy, the framed letter, and the people working beyond my office door. No, I said. But for the first time, whatever comes next belongs to me.